Part 2. At that moment, there came a soft thump from the wood behind us. What was that? I asked. Shh, 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 shh. We stood listening. Thump. There's another, I said. It was a deep, muffled sound, as though a bag of sand had been dropped to the ground. Thump. They're pheasants, I cried. Wait. They must be pheasants, Dad. Thump. Thump. You may be right, Danny. We switched on our torches and ran towards the sounds. Where were they? My father said. Over here, Dad. 2 of them. We're over here. I thought they were this way. Keep looking. They can't be far. We searched for about a minute. Here's one, my father called. When I got to him, he was holding a magnificent cockbird in both hands. We examined it closely with our torches. It's doped to high heaven. It won't wake up for a week. Thump. There's another, I cried. Thump, thump. 2 more, my father yelled. Thump, 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 thump. Jeepers, my father said. Thump, 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 thump. All around us, the pheasants were starting to rain down out of the trees. We began rushing round madly in the dark, sweeping the ground with our torches. Thump, thump, thump. This lot fell almost on top of me. I was right under the tree as they came down, and I found all 3 of them immediately. 2 cocks and a hen. They were limp and warm, the feathers wonderfully soft in the hand. Where shall I put them, Dad? I called out. Lay them here, Danny. Just pile them up here where it's light. Here's Danny's dad holding 2 of them. My father was standing on the edge of the clearing with the moonlight streaming down all over him and a great bunch of pheasants in each hand. His face was bright, his eyes big and bright and wonderful, and he was staring around him like a child who has just discovered that the whole world is made of chocolate. Thump, thump, thump. It's too many, I said. Ah, it's beautiful, he cried. He dumped the birds he was carrying and ran off to look for more. Thump, 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 thump. It was easy to find them now. There were 1 or 2 lying under every tree. I quickly collected 6 more, 3 in each hand, and ran back and dumped them with the others. Then 6 more, then 6 more after that, and still they kept falling. My father was in a whirl of excitement now, dashing about like a mad ghost under the trees. I could see the beam of his torch waving round in the dark, and every time he found a bird, he gave a little yelp of triumph. Thump, thump, thump. Hey, Danny, he shouted. Yeah, I'm over here. What is it, Dad? What do you think the great Mr. Victor Hazel would say if he could see this? Oh, don't talk about it, I said. For 3 or 4 minutes, the pheasants kept on falling, and then suddenly they stopped. Keep searching, my father shouted. There's plenty more on the ground. Dad, don't you think we ought to get out while the going's good? Never. Not on your life. We went on searching between us, and we looked under every tree within 100 yards of the clearing, north, south, east and west, and I think we found most of them in the end. At the collecting point, there was a pile of pheasants, as big as a bonfire. It's a miracle, my father was saying. It's an absolute miracle. He was staring at them in a kind of trance. Shouldn't we just take about 6 each and get out quick, I said. I'd like to count them, Danny. Dad, not now. I must count them. Can't we do that later? 1, 2, 3, 4. He began counting them very carefully, picking up each bird in turn and laying it carefully to one side. The moon was directly overhead now, and the whole clearing was brilliantly lit up. I felt as though I was standing in the glare of powerful headlamps. 117, 118, 119... 120, he cried. It's an all-time record. He looked happier than I'd ever seen him in his life. The most my dad ever got was 15, and he was drunk for a week afterwards, he said. But this, my dear boy, is an all-time world record. I expect it is, I said. And you did it, Danny. The whole thing was your idea in the first place. I didn't do it, Dad. Oh, yes, you did. And you know what makes you, my dear boy? It makes you the champion of the world. He pulled up his sweater and unwound the 2 big cotton sacks from round his belly. Here's yours, he said, handing one of them to me. Fill it up quick. The light of the moon was so strong I could read the print across the front of the sack. J.W. Crump, it said. Keston Flour Mills, London SW17. You don't think that keeper with the brown teeth is watching us at this very moment from behind a tree? I said. No chance, said Dad. If he's anywhere, he'll be down in the filling station, waiting to catch us, coming home with the loot. We started loading the pheasants into the sacks. They were soft and floppy-necked, and the skin underneath the feathers was still warm. "We can't possibly carry this lot all the way home," I said. "No, of course not. There'll be a taxi waiting for us on the track outside the wood." "A taxi?" I said. "Oh yeah, my dad always made use of a taxi on a big job." "Yeah, why a taxi, for heaven's sake?" "Small secret, Danny. Nobody knows who's inside a taxi except the driver." "Which driver?" I asked. "Charlie Kinch. He's only too glad to oblige." "What, does he know about poaching too?" "Old Charlie Kinch, of course he does. He's poached more pheasants in his time than we've sold gallons of petrol." We finished loading the sacks and my father humped his onto his shoulders. I couldn't do that with mine. It was too heavy for me. "Drag it," my father said. Just drag it along the ground." My sack had 60 birds inside it and it weighed a ton. But it slid quite easily over the dry leaves with me walking backwards and pulling it with both hands. We came to the edge of the wood and peered through the hedge onto the track. My father said, "Charlie boy," very softly, and the old man behind the wheel of the taxi poked his head out into the moonlight and gave us a sly, toothless grin. We slid through the hedge, dragging the sacks after us along the ground. "Hello, hello, hello," Charlie Kinch said. "What's all this then?" It's Charlie in his taxi. Chapter 17, The Taxi. 2 minutes later, we were safely inside the taxi and cruising slowly down the bumpy track towards the road. My father was bursting with pride and excitement. He kept leaning forward and tapping Charlie Kinch on the shoulder and saying, "How about it, Charlie? How about this for a haul?" And Charlie kept glancing back pop-eyed at the huge, bulging sacks. "Cripes, man," he kept saying. "How did you do it?" "Danny did it. My son Danny is the champion of the world." Then Charlie said, "I reckon pheasants is going to be a bit scarce up at Victor Hazel's opening day shoot tomorrow, eh, Willem?" "I imagine they are, Charlie," my father said. "I imagine they are. All those fancy folk," old Charlie said, "driving in from miles around in their big shiny cars, and there won't be a blinking bird anywhere for them to shoot." Charlie Kinch started chuckling and chortling so much he nearly drove off the track. "Dad," I said, "what on earth are you going to do with all those pheasants?" "I'm going to share them out among our friends," my father said. "There's a dozen of them for Charlie to start with. All right, Charlie?" "Suits me," Charlie said. "Then there'll be a dozen for Dr. Spencer and another dozen for Enoch Samways." "You don't mean Sergeant Samways?" I gasped. "Yeah, of course. Enoch Samways is one of my oldest friends." Enoch's a good boy," Charlie Kinch said. "He's a lovely lad." There they are in the cab. So even the policeman is getting some pheasants. Sergeant Enoch Samways, as I knew very well, was the village policeman. Here he is. He was a huge, plump man with a bristly black moustache, and he strode up and down our high street with the proud and measured tread of a man who knows he's in charge. The silver buttons on his uniform sparkled like diamonds, and the mere sight of him frightened me so much I used to cross over to the other side of the street whenever he approached. "Enoch Samways likes a piece of roasted pheasant as much as the next man," my father said. "I reckon he knows a thing or two about catching them as well," Charlie Kinch said. I was astounded. But I was also rather pleased because now that I knew the great Sergeant Samways was human like the rest of us, perhaps I wouldn't be so scared of him in the future. "Are you going to share them out tonight, Dad?" I asked. "No, not tonight, Danny. You must always walk home empty-handed after a poaching trip. You can never be sure Mr. Rabbits or one of his gang isn't waiting for you by the front door to see if you're carrying anything." "Ah, but he's a crafty one, that Mr. Rabbits is," Charlie Kinch said. "Best thing is to pour a pound of sugar in the petrol tank of his car when he ain't looking. Then he can't ever come snooping round your house later on. We always made sure to give the keepers a little sugar in their tanks before we went out on a poach. I'm surprised you didn't bother to do that, Willem, especially on a big job like this one." "What does the sugar do?" I asked. "Blimey, it gums up the whole ruddy works," Charlie Kinch said. "You've got to take the entire engine to pieces before it'll go again after it's had the sugar. Ain't that right, Willem?" Quite right, Charlie, my father said. We came off the bumpy track onto the main road, and Charlie Kinch got the old taxi into top gear and headed for the village. You dumping these birds at Mrs. Clipstone's place tonight? He asked. Yes, my father told him. Drive straight to Mrs. Clipstone's. Why Mrs. Clipstone's? I asked. What's she's got to do with it? Mrs. Clipstone delivers everyone's pheasants, my father said. Haven't I told you that? No, Dad, you haven't, I said aghast. I was now more stunned than ever. Mrs. Grace Clipstone was the wife of the Reverend Lionel Clipstone, the local vicar. Always choose a respectable woman to deliver your pheasants, my father announced. That's correct, Charlie, isn't it? Yeah, Mrs. Clipstone's a right smart lady, Charlie said. I could hardly believe what they were saying. It was beginning to look as though just about everybody in the entire district was in on this poaching lark. The vicar is very fond of roasted pheasant for his dinner, my father said. Who isn't? Charlie Kinch said, and he started chuckling to himself all over again. We were driving through the village now, and the street lamps were lit, and the men were wandering home from the pubs, all full of beer. I saw Mr. Snoddy, my headmaster, a bit wobbly on his feet and trying to let himself in secretly through the side door of his house. But what he didn't see was Mrs. Snoddy's sharp, frosty face sticking out of the upstairs window watching him. You know something, Danny, my father said. We've done these birds a great kindness putting them to sleep in this nice, painless way. They'd have had a nasty time of it tomorrow if we hadn't got them first. Rotten shots most of those fellows are, Mr. Charlie Kinch said. At least half the birds finish up winged and wounded. The taxi turned left and swung in through the gates of the vicarage. There were no lights in the house and nobody met us. My father and I got out and dumped the pheasants in the coal shed at the rear. Then we said goodbye to Charlie Kinch and began to walk the 2 miles back to the filling station. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Tomorrow's chapter 18, home. So there you go. All right. Everybody basically in the village is involved in some way and doesn't mind, is very happy to receive these stolen pheasants, even the vicar and the local policeman. All right, everybody. I shall see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.